Hey, everybody, welcome to the show. It's another exciting week here at Eggs, and we've got another great guest. Our guest this week, Kevin Bupp, is a Florida-based real estate investor who's got more than $40 million in real estate transactions. His extensive investment experience includes apartment buildings, single-family homes, office buildings, raw land, condos, and his personal favorite, mobile home parks. With more than 16 years experience, Kevin now educates investors through the Mobile Home Academy to locate, acquire, and create higher than average returns in mobile home park investing. Further, Kevin works with his clients by evaluating their investment needs and goals, identifying opportunities with above average returns, and deeply analyzing prospective investments. He hosts a popular podcast called Investing for Cash Flow. You can find it on iTunes and I'm sure most major platforms. We'll talk a little bit about the show. It's very popular and it's often found in the top 100. So without any further ado, let's invite our guest to the show, Kevin Bupp. Hey, Kevin, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. How you guys doing today?
Very good, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for making.
Thanks for having me.
Come on, really appreciate it.
Yeah, very much looking forward to it.
So let's get a little bit of background on you. I read somewhere that you kind of got your start at the age of 14, selling car electronics out of your parents' garage.
Yeah. You know, I've always been trying to, I guess, pave my own way back when I had a paper out when I was like 12, and then ultimately got interested. I had an older brother, so he was 6 years older than I, and so back then it was pretty cool to have like a loud stereo system, with all the bass and all that. I don't know if that's still cool today or not, but I'm kind of aging myself. In any event, I realized there was an opportunity to learn how to install that kind of stuff in his friends' cars, and my dad kind of taught me the ropes, and ultimately turned their garage in the weekends into basically an installation bay. And
That's
so
awesome.
so did that, had a lot of fun with that. I really enjoyed loud music back then, which I'm probably suffering for today with hearing loss. But in any event, so I was always trying to make my own way. I grew up in very much a blue collar middle class family, never went without. But ultimately, there were certain things that I wanted, the certain toys, or whether it be a bike or a dirt bike or something like that, my parents didn't have the type of budget to provide those types of, I guess, luxury toys and items. And so I was always trying to make my own money and make my own way. And I think it's just, I realized that was possible. And that kind of led me through the years into multiple different endeavors, ultimately landing on real estate when I was 19. And, that was kind of an accident. I wasn't seeking real estate. It kind of found me, which is kind of cool. And I realized, so I met a guy that was actually dating the mom of the girl that I was dating at that point in time when I was 19. And he was a local real estate investor. He owned a bunch of single family properties and small multifamily. And him and I just kind of, we created a bond. And he ultimately, after a couple weeks of knowing him, and not really fully understanding what he did for a living, he invited me to a 3-day boot camp in Philadelphia. And I went. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I figured that he invited me to this conference that cost $3,000, and that I should take advantage of it because he knows way more than what I do. And he seemed to have a pretty cool lifestyle. So I went to that boot camp and taught how to fix and flip homes. Again, had no idea what the heck I was getting into or what most of the time they were talking about, and left there just really with the realization that, number one, a majority of the folks in the audience, I didn't feel were much smarter than I was. They knew more than I did about real estate at that point, but I didn't feel like they didn't have a higher IQ. Most of them came from very similar backgrounds, and just, over years of experience, they essentially had built a business, and a lot of them were very successful. And so I didn't beg, but I kind of asked in a very pleading manner, to David, if I could basically, follow him around essentially, and learn everything it was that he was doing, and how could I bring value to him and his business during that period of time. And he graciously accepted my offer. And that's what I did for like literally a year. In between going to school, I went to a local community college and tending bar in the evenings, normally like 3 or 4 days a week. I was either at David's home office or out in the field, whether it be meeting with realtors or contractors or signing a new lease. I mean, he was very much a mom and pop type operator. So he was very involved in his business, and there was always something he was doing. And I was there with him, and I followed him for nearly a year, or actually just over a year, before I finally took the dive and actually went and bought my first property. And I bought my first property when I was 20, and I'm 39 now. And I've been doing it basically full time in different manners for the last 19 years. So
was your first property your own personal house, or did you buy?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. I actually bought a property that I probably would never live in personally. And I didn't have much. I literally had like $7,000 of money saved from tending bar. So I didn't have a lot of money like saved up. And I didn't even really have credit at that point in time. I didn't, David's actually the one that kind of taught me about the benefits of credit and building credit. And at that point, I didn't really have credit cards. And so I was kind of like simultaneously building my own personal credit while I'm trying to become a real estate investor. And I bought a really rundown row home in downtown Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is where I grew up. I mean, it was a scary place. Bought it for, I think it was like $14,000. I can't remember the exact price, but it was really rough. One of those streets where you don't go to at night, just a bad part of town. But there was a lot of demand for affordable rental housing, and David suggested that it would be a good opportunity at that price, and that he would kind of offer the resources up to kind of guide me through it. I didn't partner with him. He didn't really lend his support in the form of money. It was more of like, hey, I'll make some introductions for you. Introduced me to his private money lender. I got to know that guy pretty well. He loaned me, the money and the rehab costs. I put up basically $5 of my $7,000 I had, so pretty much all the money I had, and did the deal and learned a lot. Took twice as amount of time that I thought rehabbing it, and it turned into a rental for like a year, and then I turned around and sold it after that for a profit. So, and
nice.
essentially we did that again.
Instead of the loss on your first.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I going back, I probably would have done it differently. David was all about building cash flow, which I am too. But there's a certain point to where the first couple of deals, I really should have turned that thing just right away and sold it and took those proceeds and reinvested them right away. And Dave was at a different point in his life to where he was just buying and holding assets for the monthly revenue stream. Me, I needed to build up that capital reserve so that I could redeploy it and kind of compound that effect. And I learned that pretty quickly that I wasn't going to buy another one unless I actually cashed out on this one to reinvest those funds. So yeah, it was a good learning experience.
So how did you end up then like landing on the hot spot of mobile home parks? I think for most people, they come with a connotation and might not be most people's first pick. How did as you were buying and selling more and more property, how did you find this? I don't know if it's a gold mine or the specialty.
Yeah. The beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? But no, it seems like all the good things in my life kind of happened by accident. Right place, right time. And I went on buying lots of single family properties. And I moved from Pennsylvania to Florida because I was sick of the cold weather. And I moved after a couple of years of investing in Pennsylvania. To be more specific, I moved to Florida back in 2002. And I started buying in a big way, single family property. I understood the business now. I knew how to scale it. I knew how to find money. I knew how to tap into like the local resources. And so I went on a buying spree and building a business, into what I envisioned to be, kind of a big holding company, something that truly could provide, a small amount of passive income to me was life changing at that point in my life. And so like just to build a sustainable business that could provide the lifestyle that I wanted to live at, at that age. And I did that. And I started buying, I acquired over 120 single family rentals in a portfolio, as well as about 500 apartment doors, in a matter of about 5 years. But then 2006 leading in 2007, 2008, we all know what happened there.
I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah, it was horrific. I mean, it basically took everything I had built and completely wiped most of it out, whether it be from an equity standpoint, but also we had some major hiccups down here in the rental market.
And I know kind of stem from down there. I read a book about the crash and that one of the houses they were talking about that kind of stirred up the whole movement of the problem was based in Florida. And I can't remember. I'll have to look it up real quick and see what book.
Yeah, I mean, Florida definitely was one of the ground zero places. I mean, Las Vegas was another one, Phoenix. I mean, there were a number of markets that got hit much more severe than others. And one of the main reasons down here was there were just thousands upon thousands of spec built homes. So new rooftops being built for a population that wasn't necessarily coming. And then ultimately a lot of the population down here, a lot of the migration work, construction workers building that stuff, that when the buying, kind of dried up, when the actual financial markets crashed, those people moved somewhere else because there was no more work. And now you got all these empty rooftops that are just sitting here. And I'm talking like tens of thousands of rooftops, brand new homes that were built. This is back when, I would see a brand new home going up for construction, hadn't broken ground yet. And that contract had already been flipped on that thing like 2 times and then another 3 times before it was 100% completed. So people were flipping, pre-construction contracts left and right. It's insanity. And so what happened is, when the markets crashed, you had all this excess inventory. And so a lot of these builders, just to kind of cover their wounds and put a Band-Aid on it, they start renting these homes out, right? They got debt to pay as well. And so we had not only did we lose within a matter of 8 months, we basically went from like on average, a 64% loan to value leverage point across our portfolio to being literally negative equity in our portfolio. So they lost pretty much all the value. And then on top of that, we had all these brand new homes and they were advertising pretty aggressively to get their homes filled up. And so we had a mass exodus, or I guess not a mass exodus per se, but we had a really challenging time renewing leases because people could move from the home they were living in. That might've been a 20-year-old home. And for the same price, or maybe not much more, move to a brand new 322. And so we had a very challenging year with occupancy issues and, no equity, having a hard time paying debt service. I mean, it was like a perfect storm. It was,
How long did it take?
It wasn't sustainable. Yeah, that's it. I didn't recover. I mean, it was a strategic decision that either I was going to blow through. If I had a crystal ball and I knew that the recession was only going to last, like a year or something like that, and I knew all that I had to do was kind of hold on to it, but no one knew that. And it seemed to keep getting worse and worse every day, not getting better. And so I looked at my reserves and was like, I was literally writing checks every month. Instead of getting cash flow, I was actually writing checks to make up for the negative debt service, and it was on properties that literally were not even worth what I owed on them. And so that was at the point in time where the banks weren't really willing at that point to work with borrowers. They hadn't been hit hard enough themselves yet. A year or two after that, they were very flexible, willing to do loan modifications. They surely, were seeing the brunt of this financial impact or disaster. But in the very beginning, they weren't. And none of our banks, not one of them, was really willing to be flexible and work with us and kind of find a resolution. And so we had to strategically default, at least on the single family homes, majority of them, about 90% of them. And then in addition to that, our apartments, we had a lot of, 5-year local type regional bank debt that had 5-year balloons in place. So when those terms came due a couple of years later, financing was like, it wasn't available. In addition, our credit was really challenged at that point. So we had to sell majority of the assets that we had remaining. We sold them at the bottom of the market, like the worst time to sell. We had to kind of give them away, which was kind of like the nail in the coffin. So it was a challenging time. I learned a lot through those years. I've done things definitely differently moving forward. And I look back and I think that there's a lot of other smarter people than myself that got hurt as well. People that had been through other cycles. So I try to figure out like what I would have done differently. There are a few things, but I don't necessarily feel like I made too many mistakes that I ultimately regretted.
Well, it's not like you have the real estate crystal ball and know what's going to happen next week, so
exactly.
You kind of have to base it off of what you see happening, and what you saw happening was just down, down, down. So you get out of it how you can,
The one thing I will say is it's really hard to get an outsider's perspective when you're the guy that's inside the bubble, right? And everyone knows the general theory of buy low, sell high.
Sure.
Buy when there's blood in the streets. It's just really hard to do that when it's your blood that's in the street. So it's really hard to step back and say, you know what? I know that things are going bad on this side of my business, but how do I capitalize on this as well and actually start buying some of these distressed opportunities that are coming about? Like it was really like I couldn't get in the right mindset to do that. And so looking back, that is one thing I will do differently. If this does happen again, as far as a downturn or a correction or a recession, whatever it might be, we're better prepared for it this time around. But also, we'll be a lot more aggressive with the buying. I should have recapitalized and taken advantage of a lot of those opportunities that were out there.
So can you kind of break down how you decided to focus on the mobile homes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I took a couple years hiatus from real estate, started a few other non-real estate related businesses, just to kind of get my mind straight.
Let's sidetrack on that real quick.
Yeah.
One of them was an event company, right?
Yeah. An event
what
company.
Type of events, and why'd you decide to do that?
Sure. So at that point in my life, the one thing I could control, I couldn't control my financial situation at that point, but I could control my health and my well-being. And so I've always been into health and fitness. I'm a big runner, big cyclist. And so I wanted to build a company around something that I enjoyed doing, which was, again, I enjoyed real estate, but I didn't really think about that at that point in time. And so the first company I started, which is now the largest social running club in the country, it's called runningforbrews.com. And basically it's a craft. I love craft beer and I love running. And my wife thought I was absolutely crazy when I started that.
Like a
Anyway,
pub crawl with a twist.
yeah, so we meet at local breweries once a week. We have 50 different chapters throughout the country, and the bar, basically they pick their slowest night of the week. That's when we make our run club, and they pay us a revenue from the amount of people that we bring in. So we bring people in that wouldn't be there that night of the week, and they spend money. We go for a run, we come back, and we drink beer afterwards. And we've done a lot of like kind of offshoot charitable endeavors with that organization across the country. So I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars we've given to different local charities within those respective chapters. So that was one that I started. And then another one was an actual kind of a complementary business. It was a clothing company. So a custom clothing company for runners and cyclists. We basically made a lot of the dry fit clothing for big, like national marathons. Lots of the big cycling clubs across the country kind of came to us, and we print, those funny, goofy clothes that a cyclist wear, like the jerseys and the bibs and all that. So we created a clothing company that, again, was complementary to this whole running thing, health and fitness related. And I just had fun with that. It was a way for me to get my mind off of, the real estate, catastrophe, and a way to make money and just have fun and be out there and be social, meet people, and actually make more of a, focus more on the charitable side and the positive side of things than to focus on the disaster that was basically occurring in my real estate business at the time.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So.
I suppose anything but real estate is probably the answer.
Yeah. And so anyway, after a couple of years of that, I said, you know what, I got this bug that's itching, and real estate really was still burning inside me. And, things were kind of looking on the upward trend. I was working through a lot of the challenges on the personal side with the real estate portfolio I had. And, I knew I was going to get back in, and I made a decision one day, like, this is the time. And I knew what I would do differently. I wouldn't buy single family homes anymore. I wanted to scale back up. And now at this point in my life, I was married, and we were talking about kids. And so I didn't have 80 hours a week to focus. I didn't want to buy a single family home after single family home and take the many years to rebuild that. And I knew a better way was apartment complexes. And so I knew that I was going to be buying multifamily. And so I went on this journey, to find out what had really changed over the last 3 years. So I really shut off my real estate hat for like 3 years, completely shut it off. And so I went speaking to everyone that either had made it through the crash or started investing after the crash happened and were in the multifamily space. And during that journey, I was introduced to a guy by the name of Randy. Randy owned mobile home parks. I didn't really have an interest in Randy's business.
Sound like Randy would own mobile home parks.
Yeah. That's funny. I had no interest in meeting Randy. It was just kind of like I'm the mindset that your net worth is your network, and I like meeting new people, especially ones that have interesting stories and backgrounds. And I thought mobile home parks, the fact that he has a business built around mobile home parks, was kind of intriguing. And so I had a 2-hour lunch with Randy with no interest in his business, just to meet someone new. And I walked away after those 2 hours, basically committing to the fact that I'm going to buy a mobile home park, and I'm going to either prove Randy wrong, or come to the realization that it's a very viable business and one that we need to put our efforts into. And so that's what happened. It took me about 14 months to buy our first property, bought it, bought another one after that, bought another one after that. Now today we're in 13 states, buying mobile home parks full time. And that's our core business. That's all we do day in, day out. So.
Oh, how interesting. That's crazy. Yeah, because it does seem like, one of the last things that you might choose is the mobile home park. So. Yeah,
I know he piqued my interest in so many different ways with what, basically what he was doing in a very kind way. He was essentially comparing mobile home parks, his asset of choice, to apartment complexes, and in a very nice way, putting me down for the decision I had made to buy apartments. And it's some of the things he told me, he's like, and lots of facts I just didn't know. I never researched that niche, but one of the big ones is mobile home parks are the only asset class that exists that have a diminishing supply. And so basically, the supply demand curve is very much in the demand, in favor of the demand that's out there due to affordable housing, and the supply is just not there. It's going away. Either these parks were built in areas that maybe weren't desirable 50, 60 years ago, but now the towns or cities have kind of built around them. And now they're in areas that have a higher and better value as a redevelopment play, whether it be a shopping center or an office building, whatever it might be. So, and then, there's a negative.
You're just sitting on the property waiting for something else.
Yeah, we're not speculative, so we don't buy for that reason. But it's surely, a lot of things we own today would not have a higher and better use as something else. But that doesn't mean 15 years from now that won't be the case. But we don't buy for that reason. It's just kind of icing on the cake factor that comes out of it. But you know, what I
Well,
was going to say
so
is,
so
yeah,
like
go ahead.
sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay.
The mobile home park kind of concept, isn't most of it kind of like you own the land and you lease the lot to
Mhm.
them, and then a lot of them are like owner financing, right? Because you can't really finance a mobile home for the most part. Aren't they a little more critical about that? And so, do you actually own the homes and then kind of do like an owner finance kind of thing, and then just rent
Mhm.
the lot to them as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's actually a great question. You know, back when these parks were originally built, you know, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever, you know, era they were built in, most of them were built with the concept of, you know, the developer went in, he put the infrastructure, the roads in, the sewer lines, the water lines. And back then there was good financing available for end consumers that wanted to buy a mobile home and live in a community. It was kind of a trendy thing for a period of time. And a lot of it was like you build the infrastructure, they come. And so the business model originated as, hey, we're not building a rental community here. We're building the piece of land, kind of a parking lot where these consumers can rent the lot for their home and live here, you know, in a neighborhood type setting. Well, what happens over time is, you know, trailers get aged, people might pass away, maybe their heirs don't want it, and so the last thing we want as a mobile home park owner is a unit to leave our park, because if it leaves the park, then we got an empty lot which has no revenue. And so over years, what happens to a lot of owners of these parks is they end up buying these units that ultimately someone might pass away, someone might just get up and leave, and they don't take their trailer with them. Park owner buys it, and then they have a choice at that point. They have a choice to either turn around and sell it to a homeowner that wants to own the home and just pay lot rent, or they can rent it. We don't like the rental business model. We much prefer having homeowners in these units, although we do own probably about 120 or 130 homes today throughout our portfolio. But most of the time, it's because we acquire them that way. That's how the parks were operating when we bought it. We always go in with the intention of creating homeowners. And so if we have rental units, we want to convert those rental units into homeowners. When they own the home, they're much less transient. You know, when they just rent the unit, it's just like an apartment complex, you know, a C-grade apartment complex. When you've got a renter there, if they make it 12 months, good for you, you know, but more than likely you're probably turning at least 50% of that rental pool every year. Whereas if they own the home, we have some residents that have lived in our communities for like, I think the longest tenure is like 38 years. It's insane.
Wow.
And we've got a ton that are like 20 years plus. Once they're there and they own the home. There's nowhere cheaper for them to live. If you look at the lot rent in any one of our respective communities, I don't care which city you pick, there's nowhere cheaper that individual can live. And this is assuming they own that home. There's nowhere cheaper in that area they can live for them individually or their family. So they can't go rent an apartment for that price. They can't go, you know, even live in a boarding house pretty much for the same price. And so there's not many other options for them that are as affordable. And then also to where they have the roof, they own the roof over their head. They've got their own parking space.
Well, they've built up a little equity,
the yard.
too, so if they
Absolutely. So,
that's interesting. What would you say the average kind of lot fee is for if you were to combine all your units? If you were to just kind of say average lot fee?
Yeah, there was a study done just recently by a group, an industry-related group, that I think they said somewhere in like the low 300 range. That pretty much holds true with our communities as well. We've got some that are, you know, in the mid 400 range, and we've got some that are in the low 200 range. But you know, on average, somewhere in 300, 310, something around there. So again, there's pretty much nowhere you can live. I don't care what. Even in you know the poor cities or towns in the U.S., like there's not many places you could live for $300 a month. It just doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, once they have the house paid off, then the $300 lot fee is not that much. But I mean, you add the cost of the house, and if you're financing that as well, and then get up there a little bit. But
yeah, so we'll even lose. I mean, there's lots of situations we're willing to lose money on the house. So let's say we accumulate one of these units. Let's say someone passes away, their heirs don't want it. Let's say it's worth 10 grand. We pay 10 grand for it. Someone comes in with $7,000 cash, $6,000 cash, and they're good. Like they've got a good background, they've got a good job, good source of income. We will lose money on that unit, because from a capitalized perspective, if that lot rents for $300 a month, we just literally added another $30,000, give or take, of value just by occupying that lot. And we know that once they're there, they're not going anywhere anytime soon. I mean, it's just, it's in our favor at that point. And we can we'll recoup that loss very, very quickly in a matter of a couple of years. So
it makes sense. And then by letting them own the property, they're developing that sense of ownership, and it's actually probably helping the community out because they're now kind of they want to be looking out for the shady stuff that goes on at trailer parks and kind of keep it in order, versus if you just have them rented out, I'm sure you have a lot more problems.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, everyone, even if you work at McDonald's as the manager, I mean, you want the best typically for your family. I mean, you want the best for your kids. You want to live in a safe environment. And again, that's for most folks. I know there's some folks that don't think that way, but the majority of the population, I think they do live by that mindset. And so, another thing you get that you don't get with a renter that exists with a homeowner is most of them will have some pride of ownership, right? I mean, you'll get the people that will put the flowers, you'll plant flowers outside. They'll paint their unit. They'll put decorations out for Christmas. I mean, it's truly their neighborhood, right? I mean, that's what it is. It's a community, and you don't achieve that when you have rental units. What you achieve is just essentially a horizontal apartment complex when you just got rental units. And they're not going to put any additional work into that unit. They're going to live there, and they're going to bounce after 12 months, and you got to re-rent it again.
Yeah. Do you have for like storage units and stuff like that? They usually have like an apartment built in for the manager there. Do you kind of set up the same thing and have one dude kind of overseeing everything just to make sure it's?
Yeah, that's for the most part. That's kind of the business model. Is we have sometimes they live in the community in a unit. Like if we've got like some of the units we have, like we own the manager's office, and it's like a very large unit that has living quarters. We'll let them live there. That's part of their compensation. And then other communities that we own, they live outside, like they live a couple miles away, and there might be a small office that they come to every day to work out of. But they don't necessarily live inside the community. So we've kind of got both situations, but there is someone there locally that handles the day-to-day. They handle all the rent collections. They handle late notices. They handle, vendor calls. If we've got like a plumbing issue or a sewer backup or, a maintenance request regarding landscaping or something like that. Like they handle all the day-to-day interactions and activity.
Interesting.
Yeah. So not to take too big a left turn, but to sort of transition into some like practical advice for our listeners. How would you start, or I guess, how would you recommend somebody who's interested in getting into the real estate game get started? So you mentioned that at this point, you wouldn't maybe buy single occupancy or single family homes. You'd be more apt to get into apartment buildings or multifamily homes. Like, if you're starting from scratch, you have not a huge nest egg worth of money, but you know that real estate's the way to start building some, I don't know, longevity, or start putting some money away. How do you get started? Like, where would you begin?
Yeah, well, the beautiful world that we live in today, there's so much free education out there. I mean, just with the podcasts like you guys have, which we host as well. I mean, just this didn't exist really 15 years ago, and so I mean, there's just a litany of free information out there. So I would say to back up a little bit. There's 1,001 or even more than that, but I always say 1,001 different ways to make money in real estate, right? I think you got to figure out who you are, what the ultimate goal is for you that you're looking to achieve. It could be replacing a full-time income that you hate your job and you just want to get out of it. You're looking to truly replace it as fast as possible. It could be that you love your job and you're just looking to create a nest egg and you're willing to take your time and do it over 20 years, which would be a lot less aggressive approach. Do you want to be active? Do you want to be passive? I mean, are you the guy that likes getting in and get your hands dirty, or do you want to be the guy that's kind of the brains behind it and, invest your money wisely, but not necessarily be the one that's out there, in the trenches day by day. So I think you have to understand who you are as a person, and then you'll find the asset class or the investment vehicle that best suits your personality and your needs. And so, I'm never going to say like mobile home parks are better than everything else, right? That's my personal opinion. I like it. I see the opportunity there, but it might not be a good fit for a portion of your listeners, right? Like they might be better suited to buy turnkey single family properties that are literally takes no brain energy whatsoever. They have a provider, they buy the unit, it's got a management company, they're not involved in the day-to-day, they just get a check every month. It might be a lower return, but they don't want the headaches associated with actually managing that property themselves or dealing with renovation. So to get started, again, figure out what you want, like where you think you need to be going and what asset class, and then start with free information before you spend anything. You could go on iTunes and basically type in any subject matter that you have an interest in and probably find at least 10, if not more, probably podcasts dedicated to that subject matter, and absorb it all, and then ultimately, if you decide like that's the path you want to take, dive deeper, go out and find a mentor, find out how you can add value to someone's business that's actually doing what you want to do. Pay for education. I'm a big proponent of actually kind of fast tracking it. Find someone that you can actually pay for their advice, even if that means it's going to fast track you to get to where you want to be, whether it be a boot camp or a mentorship program, whatever, whatever again is the best suited for you. So the one thing that we don't lack nowadays, guys, is information.
Yeah, right.
Right.
I think the more difficult challenge is not getting overwhelmed by the amount of just the large mountain of information that's out there to kind of pick through. So,
well, yeah, and actually, that was, I think, part of what I was going to ask next was, there's obviously a plethora of information out there, a lot of different resources and channels and things like that. How do you know something is legitimate or whatever? I mean, especially, and we see this a lot in the small business community or in the startup community among our entrepreneurs. There are a lot of talkers out there and not a ton of doers. There are a lot of people that seem to have the way, they seem to know what to do and all that stuff. But, if you actually go down their path, you'll find that you're doing what they are, which is just sharing information, but not really actually doing it.
Sure.
Do you have any advice to kind of be wary of? I mean, obviously, there's the old adages and the old things to avoid, the get rich quicks and the things like that. But any advice for people trying to learn and how to best focus their energy?
I mean, proof is in the pudding, right? So, I mean, definitely ask for, for case studies. I mean, if you're gonna pay somebody for their knowledge or advice on a particular topic or how to do this, find out are they doing it themselves and get real case studies from them. Obviously, talk to other students that they've worked with. You can get on forums like, for example, biggerpockets.com is the largest real estate forum that exists in the world. More than likely, if there's someone out there selling a program or product, or a training guide, someone or multiple people in Bigger Pockets have had a personal experience or know of somebody that has a personal experience with that individual. So, put a post up there, get some feedback from the community. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of members or how many millions of members are on Bigger Pockets, but it is by far probably the best resource to get feedback, about a mentor or a training program that's in the real estate niche. So that would be my advice. Again, get proof of concept, get some case studies from the guy the gal you're about to pay money to, make sure that they're actually doing what they say they're doing and they're not just selling you some regurgitated amount of advice, and then go to Bigger Pockets and get some feedback from the community there.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I know that, I mean, we've had advice on this show before or had people who've talked about the concept of selling your current home or keeping it as a rental and then somehow leveraging it to buy a new home and things like that. Do you think, is that a good way into real estate investment, or are you better off buying something you don't live in, like it was your case?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all that's a kind of a more of a personal question of where you're at in your life, and ultimately, what kind of access or what kind of capital you might have access to, and I'll tell you that I personally like owning my own home. I know some people kind of will hammer against that, saying it's a horrible investment. And I don't own my own home because I think it's an investment. I just like actually having a place that if I'm going to spend money on it, make it my own and do customizations, things like that, I'm not going to do that on a rental unit. So sense. Yeah, I like owning my own home. I know it's not the smartest investment and I don't look at it as an investment, but I wouldn't look at owning your own home as an investment unless you're going to go into what some folks have coined as house hacking, where they'll go like buy a duplex. Maybe they'll live in one side and rent out the other side. That's kind of like a hybrid between the two, where I think that you can ultimately buy a roof for your own head and also, kind of feed that investment niche as well. Yeah, absolutely. Let someone else pay for. So like in that instance, I think that's a real investment.
So can you talk about like a business structure for someone who's investing in property? Because obviously, like I've heard people, you set up an LLC and then you put all the properties underneath that, so you have some sort of shelter. Do you do that? Like if you're doing like a mobile home park, would you set up an LLC for each park, or would you set up like one main one and have multiple parks underneath it?
So it's a great question. To answer that, what we do is we create a brand new LLC for each mobile home park that we purchase. And then we have a, kind of a holding company that everything kind of flows up into, one master holding company. And now with that being said, it's pretty much cost prohibitive to actually take that same approach on if you own, 10 single family rentals.
That was just my next question.
Yeah. I mean, the annual filing fees and the cost of like tax preparation, all that would absolutely kill you with, having an LLC for each individual single family home that you might have. And it
So
depends.
would you set up, like, say you had 20 properties,
Yeah.
would you set up like an LLC for a group of 5, another group of 5, another group of 5? So if someone fell on your porch and broke their neck, you wouldn't lose all your properties?
Well, one of the things that exists today that did not exist back when we owned single family properties, and I could tell you what we did back then, and this is now, 10 plus years ago, is we actually put everything, we bought every single individual property into a land trust. So it created anonymity. It's not necessarily asset protection, but it was very challenging for any attorney to find out what we owned and who owned it and how many we owned. And so we did that. That was a very cost-effective measure to basically keep them hidden, is the best way to put it. But what exists today that didn't exist back then is what's known as a series LLC. And I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to try to give legal advice or tax advice. But I think there's 3 or 4 states that offer these series LLCs, which essentially give you one LLC, but give you the ability to add individual properties underneath it that they kind of have their own individual shielded protection that would be equal to that of having an individual LLC for each of those single family homes, but it's underneath this one umbrella. So it's a much more cost effective approach to get that true asset protection without having to actually form an individual LLC for each respective single family property. Now, they do operate like one individual business. So if you got 10 single family homes underneath that one series LLC, you're still only having one tax return. And so that method doesn't really work well when we're talking about like a mobile home park or a larger commercial investment, because each one of the parks we own is its own business. I mean, the revenue and the payroll, everything is its own business. So we do not utilize that series LLC for those investments. They get their own LLC assigned to each one.
Yeah, because like a mobile home park could have 60, 100 different homes in it. So that's its own kind of entity, really.
Absolutely.
So can you tell me, in your bio on your website, you mentioned something about CCIM. Is that like an accreditation or what is that?
It is. It's probably the most profound accreditation for commercial real estate, I guess. I don't want to say, I'm not a broker, so it's not. There's a lot of brokers that have the CCIM designation, but it's for commercial real estate investors and brokers, our industry as a whole. It's the highest designation. It's the equivalent of like an MBA for commercial real estate, is the best way to put it. Yeah. So it's just it's the highest level of financial modeling, the highest level of market analysis. I mean, so it's a very intensive course. I have not completed it yet. There's I believe 5 courses in total. Each one's about a week long, but then there's a lot of other, it sounds very easy from the front end, but there's lots of other requirements that go along with it. But it's, I don't know, probably less than 1% of all commercial real estate professionals actually have that designation. So it's a pretty big deal. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't even know it existed. Just saw that. So,
yeah. So I guess, what are we doing now? So you're investing a lot in the mobile home parks and things like that, but you're also podcasting, and is that just an attempt to give back, or like what are you doing with that? Like, it sounds like education is maybe a big component of what you're doing nowadays.
Yeah,
can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I started the podcast, at least the first one. I do 2. I have one called Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow, and then another one that's a lot more niche, which is the Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast. But I started Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow about 5.5 years ago, and it was really out of necessity. I've been listening to the podcast for over 10 years now. It's probably 12 years. I mean, way before what a lot of people knew what a podcast was. And back then there was maybe a handful.
And that's about it.
Yeah, right. There was maybe 10 real estate podcasts that existed way back then. Only like 2 that are probably still around today, but all of them were really revolved around the same type of investing. They were like residential real estate investing. And at that point in my life, I was not interested in learning how to fix or flip homes. I wanted to hear about the bigger picture, buying apartment complexes, buying shopping centers, mobile home parks, right? Commercial real estate. And so I got kind of tired of like just listening to crap that wasn't really relevant to me. And I bought the equipment. Told my wife I was going to start this podcast, and ultimately the equipment sat around for like a year, and she threatened that she was going to sell it if I didn't start this show. And so that kind of pressured me to set the deadline, and I started it January 1st of, I believe it was 2014. And I did it just because of necessity. I thought that, there was plenty of other folks out there like me that probably wanted this information and no one was giving it to them. And if the worst that came out of it was me getting to meet some awesome folks and have some guys on the show that probably wouldn't take the time of day to talk to me otherwise. And then bonus, that was giving back and helping others, that it was worth it. And it really morphed into something much more than that. We don't necessarily do any paid education through that show, but it's turned into created a lot of opportunities for our business. We've raised tens of millions of dollars of capital as a result of the podcast. Lots of relationships established because of it, and again, we've helped tens of thousands of people just based on the emails that we receive, and just kind of guiding people along their way. As I mentioned, you kind of you asked the question of how you get started. How does someone get started? Go listen to the podcast. May not mind, but go find one that's relevant to you and dive in. Dive in head first, and don't come back up for air until you've actually absorbed all the episodes that are relevant to what it is you want to learn, because it's out there. So,
yeah, and then how you kind of. You just throw one on and you're listening to it kind of here and there, and all of a sudden one nugget sticks out and oh, hey, there's something I need to research, and kind of go down a whole other rabbit hole right there.
Kind of like going to a conference, right? I just got back from a conference last week, and I was wasn't all that impressed with a few of the number of the sessions. I'm like, but at the end of the day, if we just walk away from here with one or two things that we can apply to our business, then it's all worth it, right? It's all about finding those gold nuggets that are hidden somewhere. And in the podcast world, if you can just take one thing away from each episode, and there's thousands of episodes out there for you to be diving into. You could learn your business or your craft, whatever that is, incredibly quickly if you're willing to dedicate the time to it, because the information's out there and it's readily available.
So your bio also said that you are kind of like a lifelong learner and you're always reading books. Have you read any good ones lately that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, I've been really into the promotion of our podcast lately. We've always relied on organic growth to kind of grow our audience, and we've done quite well with both the shows. And so a lot of the books I've read recently have been related to like PR and gaining additional traction from kind of the foundation that we've already set forth. And a book that I just recently read, which I've read a lot of books, but one that really sticks out that it's related to a book we're releasing. The book's called Publish. It's just about self-publishing your book, kind of how the world has changed on the self-publishing platforms, as to not having to go out and find a publishing house like you did in the past, and you'll get 99% of people get rejected. Nowadays, if you got something to share with the world and it's of value, it's very easy to get that information out there in the book format. So I think everyone's got a ton of information stuck in their brain that everyone should write a book, whatever it's relevant to them and whatever they feel could make a greater impact in the world. It's so easy to do. So
yeah, it's funny because I self-publish. I worked in traditional publishing for a long time too, so I'm pretty familiar with that world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things that I think is interesting or quaint or awesome or something, is that we sort of many people we've talked to, different entrepreneurs, people like that, everybody is still trying to get that book out. Like in this world of all this technology and MP3s and digital delivery and all this stuff, like all of us still want the written word. Like we still want something in the book, and I think that's pretty great. And so being able to actually put together this book to help people do self-publishing, it's more available than ever, and it really is a awesome way for people to share information. Even I think the biggest hurdle is people convincing themselves that their information is important enough to share.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But I do think it's really great. And like I myself, I use self-publishing for a number of children's books that I do. But we know a lot of different authors and entrepreneurs and things like that have gone self-publishing route. And I don't know if you get into this in the book, but do you talk at all about the promotion of a self-published book, things like that? I think a lot of people still have this image of the publishing of kind of the yesteryear, when you got your big advance and there were people working on your behalf out publishing your book and sharing it around and things like that. And in the self-publishing world, you're really, one-man ship. It really is a separate business. Yeah. It's a private business. Do you have any expertise you can lend towards self-publishers and how to help them grow?
Yeah, so the book I'm writing is not on self-publishing. It's the book I just read is on, self-publishing. It's called Published by I can't think of Chandler's last name. Chandler. I'm drawing a blank, but in any event, it was I know you're looking it up right now, so you'll let us know what that is. But I just saw him literally speak about a week ago at a conference and grabbed the book and read through. He's a young kid. I think he's like 26 and brilliant. I think he's released 4 or 5 books thus far. And it's done quite well. So there's lots of information in that book. It's a simple read. It's like 200 pages long, but lots of valuable information in there of how to not just self-publish, but also promote the book as well. Like actually get it out there to the world. Yeah, my book is actually about real estate investing. My book follows the theme of commercial real estate investing. It's called Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow. So it's really about the introduction to what I consider to be the bigger world of real estate investing. It's kind of like the next level. Most folks kind of start out in like single family investments and then realize that, damn, the same amount of effort and energy.
Could have had the commercial.
Absolutely. Yeah. Literally, I could have bought that shopping center. Like the guy that owns a shopping center down the road or the apartment complex, he's just an individual, right? Or it might be maybe a few individuals, but ultimately the same steps are needed. It's just bigger, more zeros at the end. That's all.
All right. So the book was published by Chandler Bolt.
There you go. There you go. I knew he had a cool last name.
So that's cool though. Shoot, what was I going to say? Crap. I lost it.
Hey, when that happens.
Okay, so let's talk about, I guess, then the transition from home ownership, or I guess single property into commercial real estate. Did you notice that there was a big learning curve difference? Or, I mean, like you just mentioned, it's kind of just more zeros, but was there some big dramatic shift going from retail, property that you would be selling to a consumer versus commercial real estate?
Well, isn't the financing a little different too?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can speak to my personal experience, but then today it's a little bit different. But back then when I made that shift, there wasn't a lot of information readily available on commercial real estate. It's one of the reasons I started my podcast, right? Like if you went to Amazon and typed in how to invest in commercial real estate, you'd be really lucky if you found one book. In fact, if you found anything, it'd probably be like a scholastic book from one of the local real estate courses in one of the universities. Like it wouldn't be like a legitimate like how to. It'd just be from a professor standpoint of view. So there wasn't a lot of information available in commercial real estate for the most part up until probably the last 5 or 10 years. It's like a good old boy network, right? I mean, like the local developers and investors, they're the guys that are tied into the local that local area. The wealthy folks that don't really share their secrets. They're not, it's an older demographic. And anyway, that's changed a lot over the years. And so I think today's a little bit easier to get your footing and better understand what the opportunities are out there. And so it was a lot harder of a transition for me. I had to network probably a lot more and meet the people that are willing to share and divulge that information. Today, though, it's readily available, and I don't think it would be as much of a transition for someone getting out of like single family investments to dive into commercial real estate. I think the most important part is like the focus, like pick that one, like don't say I want to invest in commercial real estate. That means I want to own shopping centers. I want to own office buildings and self-storage. That's fine at a certain point. Pick one and master, because they're all very different than the next. They're all their own individual skill sets and challenges and unique nuances that exist. So pick one asset class and then dive in deep and go dive, or dig through all the information that's out there in it and find a couple experts in that field that are teaching about it, that are, willing and open to lend their information, their advice to you. And I don't think you'd have a challenge nowadays, whatever asset class you chose, to find information out there and find someone willing to either sell it to you or finding someone willing to be open about sharing kind of their personal experience about it and how to get started.
Cool. Okay, well, we're kind of getting to that time. Where can people find you at, Kevin? Yeah,
there's 2 different places. My personal website, kevinbupp.com. I've also got the episodes for Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow. That podcast are up there as well. But you can just go to the Contact Us page on kevinbupp.com and that will make its way to me. And then our company website, if you have an interest in seeing what we're doing in the mobile home park investment space, it's sunrisecapitalinvestors.com. And also I can be reached through there. Just go to the Contact Us page and it will make its way to me. I'm not too hard to track down.
So I noticed when I went to your personal site, the kevinbupp.com, a pop-up showed up saying that if you have any leads on mobile home parks or anything like that that's for sale, to forward them your way.
Absolutely.
People do that? Are they getting a little kickback there? Is that
we do? Yeah. No, we do. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we just a couple of weeks ago we closed on a deal. And we paid a $75,000 finder's fee on it. So we've paid 6-figure finder's fees in the past, and so we've got a lot of different options. It's not a black and white referral system. It really depends on the deal, how much room's left in it, but we'll basically pay some very hefty fees. We'll pay for good opportunities is the best way to put it. So
yeah. That's awesome. That's really cool.
I'm going to start jumping on the real estate blogs trying to find property for you.
Please do,
yeah,
man.
It sounds like you'd be willing to take it. That's awesome. Cool. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, like you said, kevinbupp.com. You can also find him on iTunes if you look for the Investing in Cash Flow podcast. And what was the name of the other one, Kevin?
The Mobile Home Park Investing podcast.
And the Mobile Home Park Investing podcast as well. I guess then, without anything else, Mike, do you have anything?
No, I think it was a great discussion. Thanks for making the time.
Yeah,
for
thanks
us.
so much for your time, Kevin. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, guys.
And yeah, awesome to learn about this stuff. I'm really fascinated. I am just really in the really baby phases. You know, some of the questions I'm asking are kind of a little bit self-serving, just because, you know, I have some real interest in getting into real estate, and we have a home that we've got in a lease-to-own situation in Idaho, and our tenant is done in June. He's either supposed to refinance or he's got to move out. We're either going to take it back, or it will be sold and we'll be done with it. And so the big debate has been, do we hang on to it as a rental if it comes back to us, because we know that's going to mean fixing it up and evicting his tenant, all this other stuff, or do we just want it sold? That, you know, like what are we hoping to get out of this thing? So anyway, and then we're hoping to buy some homes here in Utah where we're at now. So
yeah,
anyway, cool. Exciting stuff ahead. I wish I was just a few steps further down the road. I'd have more questions for you.
Well, if those questions come up, reach out, and the same with the listeners as well. If anyone has any questions regarding whether it's making that transition into commercial real estate, or even, you know, specific questions about commercial real estate investing, or even mobile home parks, they can reach out to me again through either one of those websites. You know, post your questions there in the notes section, and I'll be sure to reach out. Either I'll reach out personally, or I'll put it on a show and I'll send them a link to it, and I'll answer it directly for them.
That's awesome. Cool. Thanks so much, Kevin. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Have an awesome week, and we'll see you next time.